Hi, my name is Jennifer Maddrell. I'm host of the AI for Educators Design Lab at NextPath Design. The following is a recording of our Design Sprint preview. It was recorded on May 28, 2026. During the preview, I walked through what participants can expect during our upcoming Design Sprint. It's focused on designing AI-resilient learning experiences. The Design Sprint kicks off June 15th and runs through the 18th. And over 4 days and about 5 hours, participants who enroll will walk through a replicable design process to take one of their own AI vulnerable learning experiences and then redesign it for an AI integrated world. My personal goal with all our programming at NextPath Design is to connect with educators, instructional designers, and learning leaders. I see AI as not just another tool to add or a potential threat to monitor, but as a complex design challenge. One that involves tricky implications and constraints, awareness of context, and ethical thinking. If you're feeling AI is changing what you know about teaching and learning, and you want a space to think about how AI integration is affecting your own context with your own learners, I'd love to have you join us. Information about this design sprint and all NextPath Design offerings can be found at nextpathdesign.com/join. This is the first design sprint I've done under my new organization called NextPath Design. And so I want to give you an opportunity to kind of hear my reasoning behind it and what my aims are, and then have time at the end to get some time for us to talk and have some questions and answers about what I've described and how that might work in terms of what you're experiencing in this new age of trying to teach and some of us learn in the age of AI. I just want to make sure everyone's aware that this session is being recorded. The slides are currently available right now. So if you'd like to see the slides as I'm going through them, or if you can't stay the entire time today, if you just head over to nextpathdesign.com/design sprint, you'll be able to get a copy of the slides that I'm going through right now, and then also get more information on how to enroll. I'm going to put it in the text chat right now. So that's the link to nextpathdesign.com/design sprint. So I wanted to start out kind of telling a little bit of a personal story for where I came to be offering this course, designing AI resilient learning experiences. And I keep using the word course, but it really isn't. It's a design sprint. And I've offered these in the past with my other organization. Some of you may have either participated with, been a volunteer with, maybe even taught some of our courses. But the other organization was called Designers for Learning, and that was a nonprofit. And we disbanded the nonprofit right around the time of the pandemic when it became very difficult to manage virtual service learning projects. So this is kind of, as I mentioned earlier, this is my new venture, part of NextPath Design. And I wanted to spend just a second talking about the imagery you'll see me use frequently when I talk about NextPath Design. This is actually the walking path that you walk on almost every single day. And this is where I do a lot of my thinking. And certainly in this age of AI, I've done a lot of thinking about AI. And I've been thinking about how I want to engage with AI, how I can hopefully help my learners navigate working with AI. And so, like everyone probably on this call, I've had a windy path to get here. Just to give folks a bit of background who may not be familiar with my history and maybe did, like I said, did not work with us with Designers for Learning. My background originally, I have my degree in finance, and I spent 17 years in a career in insurance underwriting. And so about, like I said, 15, 20 years into that career, I decided that's not really where I wanted to spend the rest of my career. And so I made a transition into education and ultimately became, like a lot of folks, an accidental instructional designer. And we hear that term a lot, where folks didn't really even know instructional design was a field or a career you could have. And I also kind of stumbled in on it. And so then I got a master's degree in instructional design and technology, and then ultimately a PhD at Old Dominion University. As I mentioned, started the nonprofit where we tried to connect instructional design students with nonprofits who needed some assistance in creating open educational resources. And then I continued it along this path as an adjunct. I taught at University of Virginia, taught a class or two at Old Dominion where I got my degree, and then also did a little bit of teaching at University of New Mexico. And then I also did consulting work along the way as an instructional designer. And so that was all fine and good until then I kind of hit this, as most people probably on this call or have done, kind of hit what I'm terming this AI roadblock. And as I said, I spent a lot of time walking on my trails, listening to podcasts, and kind of thinking like, what's next? What's my next path? What's the next path for our field? What's the next path for our learners? And then that really became then the impetus behind rebranding and thinking about my design work as helping folks on their next path. And so, well, you'll see these logos throughout. And that's really this, again, this idea. I really view us all on a new path. This is our next path. And I really hope we can come together and collaborate and try to figure out ways that we can navigate this path successfully together. And so if you want to see some of the programming that I've already put together, I'm going to put this link in the chat. This is where you can go on our website. I'll put it there. If you go to nextpathdesign.com/join, I'm going to take you through a couple screens to give you a sense of some of the programming I already have in place at Next Path Design. And then we'll get into the weeds and get into the details of what's happening then within our design sprint. So the AI Path Foundations is more of what I would consider a traditional course. So it's an evergreen course. It's designed for you to take at your leisure, take all the time you want to go through the materials. It's 5 modules. And then there's also an online community where you can collaborate with others who are also going through the material at their own pace. And the focus of the AI Pathfinders Foundations is really to get a solid understanding of generative AI and some of the main tools that folks are using. So that's anything from ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, Gemini, and Perplexity. And it's really that foundational information about what are these tools, how are they put together, who's behind them, who are the organizations behind them, what are some of the things you can do to protect your own safety, security, and privacy. And then getting into some of the basic prompting and then getting into some of the pitfalls and things you might want to watch out for in terms of hallucinations and evaluating outputs and things like that. And so that's a course that's been running for about a year now, and it's been great. It just kind of runs in the background. There's no live sessions. And like I said, that is something that's available right now that anybody could take. It's very beginner focused and beginner friendly. And then about beginning of this year, I really started to focus all my attention on AI for Educators Design Lab. And so this is really focusing, again, on teaching and learning in the age of AI. And I brought along with me a lot of the folks that were in my contact list from Designers for Learning. So there are about 4,000 of us out there that were part of my email list. And so I'm continuing that newsletter. That's probably, I'm assuming, how a lot of folks who are on this call right now have found out about this design sprint and about this webinar is through that newsletter. But I've also started a podcast, and then I have a companion to the podcast that I'm referring to as Design Briefs. So the AI for Educators Design Lab podcast is really trying to focus on these pain points that are part of AI integration. So these design challenges that we're all facing. And then the design briefs are giving you the opportunity to think through those in terms of the design considerations that may affect you and your learners and things that are happening within your context. And so I started out with a list of about 10 pain points that I came up with, the kind of the top 10 challenges that I was hearing from educators through surveys that I was putting out myself or just looking at surveys that other organizations had put out. At this point, I'm about halfway through. I've got 5 of them that I've completed, starting with academic integrity, rethinking your learning goals in the age of AI, some of the concepts associated with AI literacy. And another huge issue people talk a lot about is how can we continue to design for human presence when we're integrating AI into our learning experiences. And then the last one that I just released about a couple weeks ago is about designing for privacy and security. So like I said, we're about halfway through of the categories and topics that I originally had come up with, and we'll pick up again in the fall, continuing the podcast with those additional topics. And so what I want to talk now about are specifically the topics I covered in the first 2 episodes of the podcast. And that really feeds into what is the focus of the design sprint. So the design sprint is really based on a challenge, and that's pretty common to any type of design sprint you may have come across. And so in our case, I'm looking at this as a design problem associated with AI vulnerable learning experiences. And I'm going to spend a couple minutes in a second talking about what I mean by an AI vulnerable learning experience. and then going through the design process to then with the goal of making it more AI resilient. And so I really want to be clear here that when I say AI resilient, I'm really not defining what that means for every learning experience. It's going to be different for everybody. You may be in a situation where this AI has to be completely outside the bounds of what's acceptable. It may be on the other side of the spectrum. It may be where you want to fully integrate AI and you are teaching a lot of AI literacy concepts. And so I just want to make it really clear, I'm not making any types of judgment on what an AI resilient learning experience looks like in terms of that end product. But I want to talk about it more in terms of what it looks like to design that type of experience versus more of an AI vulnerable learning experience. So that's where I want to spend some time in the next, just giving you some context from my perspective of how I see the differences between an AI vulnerable versus an AI resilient. So for the most part, our AI vulnerable learning experiences were designed well before AI was even part of the landscape. And so the learning goals and the learning tasks are things that we're finding AI can easily complete. So maybe it's reproducing information just by putting the prompt of the assignment into ChatGPT. In contrast, then, when I'm talking about AI resilient learning experiences, I'm talking about more of those experiences where judgment is required and critical thinking and interpretation and learners' decision making and kind of the learning getting a better understanding of the context within which they're doing their learning tasks. And not to say that those weren't part of the original way we designed our learning experiences, but those are the types of things that are first of all, a little harder for AI to be able to do. And conversely, if AI can do it, you still need the judgment to know whether or not it's doing the right thing. And so those are skills that now getting into what your learning goals are, these are goals and skills and aims that maybe we're going to need to tweak and rethink and readjust. And that's kind of part of this idea of redesigning for AI resiliency. And then also in these older assignments that in learning experiences that we've designed, we're assuming that AI wasn't even in the picture. So we're hoping that AI won't be something that the learner is using to complete the learning task. And then in contrast with AI resilient learning experiences, we're embedding AI literacy and fluency. And we have to make an assumption that our learners are coming at this with varying levels of access and literacy and fluency. And then in terms of measuring the success of the learners as they're progressing through the course, again, AI vulnerable learning experiences, those final deliverables very often, and again, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, these final deliverables can, for the most part, be easily generated by AI. And so where we need to then spend our time and as we're redesigning is thinking about how we can see the evidence of the learning during the process. So making that learning visible. And thinking about how we're helping them make these informed decisions as they do get output from the AI, how they can use it and how they can use their reasoning skills to be able to make decisions and arguments based on maybe what they find from the AI or how they maybe collaborate with AI. And so the assessments then, and again, very much I'm sure, and speaking with most educator friends of mine, are at this point, like, what do I do? I'm playing a cat and mouse game here of trying to see if students are using it. Do I ban it? Do I spend time detecting it? And my goal, hopefully everybody's goal should be that we're finding ways to get away from that and maybe find other forms of assessment or learning tasks where really we're focusing on making the learner's experience not only helpful, but also making it easier for us to be able to visualize and measure what's happening and whether the learners are walking away knowing and being able to do something that they weren't before. And so then in terms of AI policies, these are obviously things we weren't even thinking about 5 years ago or so. And so for a lot of folks really struggling to understand even what your institution's policies are. So if we don't understand, it's very sometimes it's also then difficult to try to explain to students what policies might be on a macro level at, say, a university or within a school system, or what it's required within an individual assignment. So a lot of the things we need to do then is spend time really thinking about how AI fits into your course and what are our explicit guidelines for their use, and then trying to somehow align those with our learning goals. And then last but not least, this whole idea of what does our redesign pressure look like? So, kind of a broken record here, but under AI vulnerable learning experiences, a lot of our time right now is spent, and again, apologies for preaching to the choir, but it's just worth saying. A lot of our time right now is spent on establishing AI use policies, enforcing them, and in monitoring them. And so, certainly, my goal, and I think a lot of educators I talk to, if we could get away from that and just have some, clarity in terms of what our purposes, our purpose are in terms of AI use and what those conditions and constraints might be, and how we express those to our learners. So, hopefully, with that, I'm giving you a sense of where I'm coming from because I think this is really important. If you spend any time on LinkedIn or any time talking to educators in different conferences or different organizations you belong to, you hear people coming at AI from a lot of different ways. And I'm not saying my way is right. I'm just putting kind of a delineation around how I view where we are now versus where I hope we can be in the future, which is, again, kind of more on this right-hand side of the column. And so what I'd like you to do, and you can put it in the chat if you want, or if you just want to hang on to the thought now, is through me describing this, I'm assuming you came to this with some idea of what your AI vulnerable learning experiences are. Maybe you didn't define them necessarily the way I have, but I really want you to kind of think about this in terms of, again, as I said, a design problem. So these are those AI vulnerable learning experiences that we would be able to work on together during the design sprint. And so now getting into the nuts and bolts of what the approach I'm taking within the design sprint. As I mentioned, I'm very much viewing this as a problem-solving activity. So we've got our problem over here, a problem space that we're trying to understand, and then we're ultimately trying to make our way to a solution that works for us individually within our own context, within our own learners, within our own subject matter, the learning levels, and things like that. And again, as I've said many times, and I'll continue to say, I don't think there is an answer for what is the best solution. It really depends on your context, your learners, and what's going on with where you teach and where you design, what project you're designing. So for the purposes of the design sprint, I'm using what's referred to as double diamond design process model. It's just kind of a basic, I'm saying basic meaning it's stripped down design approach where, and I'll go through here. Let me click through here. You kind of start out with trying to understand your problem space before you get into what a solution might be. So, and we'll do this within the design sprint. We're spending a lot of time thinking about the discovery of what's happening, what our constraints are, what our opportunities are, who our learners are, what are their AI literacies, just kind of really understanding what it is we're experiencing before we get into thinking about any type of solution. We're thinking about, what is the current, what has happened, where are we not right now? And through that process, then we get to define what it is we want to work on. And so in terms of our design sprint, this will really be crucial because even maybe right now you have questions. When I talk about a learning experience, you kind of get into the granularity of what is that. If you think about it on a very macro level, it could be an entire curriculum, but I'm really not thinking of that right now. What I'm hoping we can refine our thoughts to or something specific like an assignment or maybe a project that a student's working on during a span of a course, something like that. So through this process, then you kind of define what the scope of the problem is that you want to tackle. Then you're at a point, then you're able to start thinking and developing solutions. And so the idea here is kind of come up with a lot of different solutions that could potentially help you solve that design issue, the design challenge that you have. And then there's a process of where you deliver it and there's implementation. And so for those that are listening, this may sound a little bit like ADDIE because ADDIE is a design approach. And so it makes a lot of sense. And so the idea here, that's when you start to actually implement and evaluate the success of that. And so I wanted to then take that through to our design sprint and what that might look like. So we're starting in our problem space being the AI vulnerable as part of the understanding through the discovery and defining what it is we want to work on. And then ultimately working toward this AI resilient learning experience. And so within the scope of the design challenge for our design sprint, where we only have 4 days to tackle this. So we're really hoping that through those 4 days, we can focus on those first 3 boxes on the left and then help you think through how you can work on implementation and doing that evaluation work of what you have put out into the world to see if it actually works. But this discovery process will be looking at diagnosing the extent of the vulnerability of your assignment that you currently have, or the whatever the type of learning experience is that you want to work on. Then within the define phase to be able to clarify then those learning goals. Do you want to be able to use AI at all? And if so, to what extent? And then ultimately state what your design challenge aims are. Then you'd be able to, at that point, generate some redesign options and then consider the trade-offs, some of the pros and the cons, and then to choose a direction. And then last but not least, as I said, then test those chosen directions to refine them based on your results and then to implement and evaluate. So what I want to do is talk about then how that might look like with an actual assignment. So as I said, within our design sprint, we're really focusing on these first three boxes. In my particular example, the one that I'm currently working on, and I always like to get educators' feedback, and something I'll bring to the table when we're working through the design sprint is the one I continue to work on, is I have an annotated bibliography. It's part of a literature review class that I've taught for many, many years, where students in college, a graduate level class, are supposed to go out and immerse themselves into a body of literature to find and evaluate and synthesize sources. That's something AI can do in a matter of seconds. And so I was by me being able to go into generative AI, and I was able to reveal that my aims and my tasks are completely outdated and need to be redesigned. And so my refined goal is to then think about it more in terms of how am I going to immerse students into the literature? How can I use AI to help students surface work within this body of literature versus being able to complete the assignment? And then really focus, as I mentioned when I was talking about AI resilient assignments, thinking about how I can redesign the assignment to make it where they're evaluating and making judgments based on what they're finding. And maybe a little bit less so spending time about how they can use Google Scholar, for example, or for how they can use some of the tools that we used to use to be able to surface those works. That's getting to be a little bit less of an emphasis versus, again, this idea of making judgments and evaluating what they're seeing. So where I'm at now in the development process, I am retaining an annotated bibliography assignment, but it really doesn't look like it did in the past. I've actually added a lot more kind of one-on-one conversation. So I'm getting away a little bit from having written products that have to be nicely polished and something they turn in at checkpoints, for the simple reason that something, again, AI can do quite easily. But having those one-on-one conversations makes it a little bit harder for the AI just to be able to take over. They still have to be able to stand up and defend and tell me one-on-one what they're finding. And it gives me, again, that opportunity to make their learning visible and as we're talking through it versus, again, relying on a written assignment. And so in terms of delivery, I have delivered some modified versions of my original learning experience. And some things have worked out and some things haven't. And so that's kind of the process I'm in right now, of deciding what I'm going to continue forward with and things that I'm going to be changing and adjusting. But like I said, this is something that I want to continue to work on during our design sprint. And I'll be sharing some of what I'm doing and looking for feedback from others on what you think of what I'm doing and whether or not you have other suggestions. So then in terms of what our design sprint looks like, this is kind of getting into then just the behind the scenes, the schedule of what it will look like. First, I wanted to give you a sense of the timing. There's some pre-work that I'll be sending out about a week before June 15th, but the actual design sprint itself really kicks off on June 15th. I've scheduled 2 live sessions for about an hour each on Monday, June 15th and on June 18th. And have no fears if you cannot make the live sessions, that's not a problem. Everything's going to be recorded and posted. Our home base is going to be a learning management system called Kajabi. And so we have the ability to have asynchronous discussions within a community space, and that will be our home base where I present materials. And then certainly the recordings for those 2 live sessions, if you can't make it live, they will be posted there. And then just reiterating what I mentioned, this will be our schedule based on what that design process looks like. The first 2 days spending a lot of time in that discovery mode, starting around Tuesday, June 16th, spending more time independently, really defining what it is that you're true core issue is, what is making your assignment AI vulnerable, and then making that pivot on the 17th to have some asynchronous work. And when I say that you have something to work on, these are going to be things that I've put together and I have together within Kajabi, like worksheets and audits where you can kind of think through these. These are prompts for you as you're going through this design process. So again, for Wednesday, when you make that pivot to developing, what might the changes look like, and what might you want to make tweaks with? And then as we get into the last day, when we have a live session, that'll really be our opportunity to share and compare and debrief what it is we're coming up with and talk through with each other about how these options we've come up with might look like, and then how you might then make that pivot to delivering it and then evaluating the success of it. And so with that, I'm kind of done talking, and I'm going to just close down here unless anyone wants me to go back on any slides. But I'm just kind of curious if people want to use your microphones, or if you want to use the text chat to ask any questions. What are your thoughts? What are your perceptions of what I'm laying out? How does this align with the way you've been trying to redesign your courses? And does this sound like something that would be worthwhile experience for you to engage in?